The following Caste vs. Varņa narration is based on the Raufa 2019 of the Ghent School and collated by Krogan, a member in the Sanatana Discord. There will soon be video I've used before, but note that the narration has changed, or you can read it yourself from the server or Krogan's Medium links posted in the description. Caste has today become a buzzword across the globe, especially for human rights activists abroad. For instance, Isabel Wilkerson calls caste the mother of all racism. For her, caste is the grammar of racism, a structure on which all discrimination operates over the globe. In fact, even the atrocities committed in Nazi Germany get blamed on the same system. Wilkerson 2020. A recent critique of Wilkerson's book notes, that's Wilkerson quoting Gidler and Horn 2021, caste is the grammar that structures the language of race, the bones beneath the skin, the beams and joists of the national house, the infrastructure of our subdivisions, the subconscious code maintaining the architecture of human hierarchy, an operating system for economic and social interactions, a cultural DNA, a wordless usher guiding us to our seats, an intravenous drip into the mind. End quote. What evil is this, which has been oppressing a very specific community for thousands of years? How has it been able to do so? Who protects it? How did it come to be? And what does it actually mean? Section 1. The ambiguity of caste. In the standard textbook account of the caste system, we find repeated references to 4 principles, on which this evil and immoral system allegedly rests on. Jalki and Pathan 2015 lists down these principles, which are A. Occupational division sanctioned by Hinduism, B. Hereditary membership, C. Endogamy, and D. Discrimination against lower castes and or outcasts through untouchability. The job left for a scholar is now to build upon this framework and address the problems raised by this immoral structure. However, I would first call off to revise all these principles and question if the caste system really rests on them. To move forward with the first claim, that the caste system is an occupational division sanctioned by Hindu rituals, we would first need a basic unit of caste. In other words, what do Indians understand caste to be? There are several contenders for this, with the most prevalent ones being Varņa and Jāti. Since caste is seen as the mother of all racism, and a subconscious code maintaining the human hierarchy, one would expect to have a clear-cut definition of caste. However, what we find are ambiguous claims about the basic unit of it. Accounts of no 2 scholars match completely. Some scholars escape the discussion by conflating both Varņa and Jāti, see Jaiswal 1998. However, these explanations do not satisfy our expectations. How would these scholars address the relationship, if any, between Varņa and Jāti? Caste thus becomes the apocryphal elephant in the room. In fact, the scholars at Balu's research program argue that we don't even have clear knowledge about very basic concepts of caste. For example, what constitutes the basic unit? How are they related? What sustains it? What does it serve to protect? And so on and so forth. The only thing we know is that the caste system is an ancient Indian oppressive structure which is hierarchical. That's Farek et al. 2017. This would give a devastating look at the South Asian or Indology departments across the world if we do not have clear knowledge about this system. How can we make up our mind to eradicate it from the face of the earth? How can we be sure it is immoral? Yet, we have to continue with our investigation so as to understand what evil is this. The first step for us is to find the basic unit of caste. Therefore, we have to move forward with the most commonly referred contenders and verify the claims being made about them today. I would first start with Jāti, because it is the most widely shared view among sociologists today. Padma Bhushan awardee and India's eminent sociologist M.N. Srinivas also thinks of caste as Jāti, says Ames and Srinivas 1964. For having an open-minded discussion, we first need to free ourselves with the definitions of Jāti as we understand it, but similarity with caste ends here. Samarendra 2014 correctly points out, I quote, "In vernacular literature, we come across the Lohar and the Sonar Jāti professional communities, the Maratha and the Bangla Jāti linguistic or cultural communities, the Hindu and Musliman Jāti putatively religious communities, the Munda and the Oraon Jāti communities presently registered in the government documents as tribes, the Vaidya and the Bhumihar Jāti communities which are endogamous, Mardan Ki Jat and Aurat Jat, community of men and community of women, etc. End quote. Jati at best means a community. Even in the ancient Sanskrit literature, we find that Varna are being referred to as Jatis. It should not be concluded from this that the former and the latter are the one and the same. This is because Shudra Varna can be referred to as Shudra Jati without changing the meaning, but any other Jati, for example, Shuta, can never be called as Shuta Varna. Therefore, to remove the ambiguity surrounding this word, we need to apply the lens of some other property that is joint with the caste system and can be observed empirically. According to me, there can be no property as good as endogamy which can help us now. After all, Dr. Ambedkar termed endogamy to be the only characteristic that can be called the essence of caste. Ambedkar 2015. Note well, there is yet another concept, i.e. subcaste. Those who favour Jati to be an accurate conception of caste claim that there are numerous subcastes within a caste, which are again endogenous groups. Even a 10-year-old would notice the self-contradicting claim here. If castes are endogenous, how is it possible that some groups inside a caste are also endogenous? A collection of numerous endogenous groups does not create one big endogenous group. Jalki and Prathan, 2015, demonstrate this problem by showcasing some Jatis of Karnataka. I quote, "Among Kurubas there are Halu, Jenu, Sana, Doda, Kadu, and so on. And among Nayakas there are Measa, Valmiki, Beda, Uru, and so on. In no case do we find that one subcaste of Kuruba is allowed to marry with another subcaste of Kuruba, and the same applies to the Nayaka as well. In other words, Kadu Kurubas and Jenu Kurubas do not intermarry, and Nyasa Nayakas and Uru Nayakas do not intermarry. Now, if you say that a caste is an in-marrying group, which unit is caste here? Kuruba or Kadu Kuruba? Nayaka or Myasa Nayaka? Therefore, there are three solutions which we can derive from this. 1. Label subcastes as the real castes. 2. Defy endogamy to be a constitutive property. Or 3. Completely reject the Jati hypothesis. If subcastes are made to be the real castes, then even more questions wait our way. If, for example, Kadu Kuruba is the real caste, then what do we make of Kuruba? Another question would be, since castes such Kadu Kuruba, Halu, Doda, etc. are now endogenous and self-sustaining units, what would bind all of them together into one big Kuruba unit? We do not have answers to these questions now, which leads us to our second solution, to defy endogamy as a property of the caste system. However, this solution looks naive to me. Just because an explanation is not meeting the expectations of a constitutive property of the caste system, we cannot reject the property. We have to reject our hypothesis. Therefore, Jati cannot be said to be a unit for caste. Now, we need to move on to our next contender, Varna. I have no problem in conventionally accepting Varna to be a caste. It meets all our expectations. It is sanctified by Hinduism, it is hereditary, and it is endogenous. The only exception is that it is not oppressive, but many people consider it to be one. Since proving that Varna is not oppressive is out of scope of our discussion, we will leave it here and go on with the mainstream conception, that the system is oppressive. But let's not forget the reality we are supposed to describe. No society anywhere in India is divided on the lines of Varna. The fourfold divisions which this contender brings us is more text-based, as found in Manava Dharma Shastra, etc. See Samarendra 2014, Farek et al. 2017. We are not the first people to face these problems. In fact, W.R. Cornish, the supervisor of census operations in the Madras Presidency, verifies our claim by noting that, I quote, "Whether there was ever a period in which the Hindus were composed of 4 classes is exceedingly doubtful," by Chakravorty 2019. End quote. What do we do now? Let's move to endogamy again. Which other groups in India are endogenous? And fulfill our other criteria that can be classified as caste. The only group till now which has stayed true to endogamy are the subcastes, when Jati is said to be caste. Therefore, we have to agree that these subcastes are the real castes, since nothing other than that qualifies for the problem. However, we now have Gotra further complicating the matters. Jalki and Pathan 2015 continue, I quote, "Traditionally, when a Vadakalai Brahmin goes in search of a bride, he is looking for a person who is A. Brahmin, B. Iyengar, and C. Vadakalai, and D. who is not from his own Gotra. Hence, if we take the notion of endogamy as a fundamental property of the castes, Vathakalai is the only endogenous group. Furthermore, traditionally not every Vathakalai will marry another Vathakalai, since in Gotra marriages are a taboo, that is to say, the Vathakalai subcaste is simultaneously both exogamous and endogamous. You see the mess? So, can endogamy not be seen as a principle which holds caste? Was Ambedkar ignorant about Gotras throughout his life? Actually, no. Ambedkar was very well aware about the Gotra problem, and therefore, in the same work, he says that the correct way to see the caste system is to see the superimposition of endogamy on exogamy. Therefore, an exogamous society was divided on the lines of endogamy. This looks an ugly but a very good sociological theory. Without any evidence, how can we verify such a bizarre theory? In fact, caste studies seldom get some attention from historical sources, because problems here are easily solved by dropping slurs on the evil, cunning Brahmanas. Dismissing endogamy as a criterion for caste does not solve our problem. We still have to look for the basic unit of caste. Is there any official documents from the time period when the story of caste started that can give us some proper definition? We find caste to be a word belonging to a language family which is not natively Indian. We know that castes were statistically measured among the demographics of India during the British caste census. So what does the census say? Well, for the census of Northwestern Province in 1865, we had Sikh, Jogi, Jain, Sunni, etc. to be on the same level as Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra. In fact, the names of castes have never been homogeneous throughout the history of the caste census. No census, no table, and no report was finished before adding a section titled No Caste or Caste Unknown. See Samarendra 2014 for more information. Therefore, even the census is of no help to us, and 1840 was the first written excerpt of caste system that was by an English person. So what do the scholars of the same time period say? They contradicted each other, and the ambiguity in their claims was unprecedented. See Farek 2017. How do we proceed now? Why was this problem not taken up by the scholars of the past 200 years and solved already? We do not find any scholar who takes up these problems and sees them as responsibility to resolve them. All we see are scholars who sidestep the problems by claiming that the caste system has so many local manifestations in various regions of the country that it is almost impossible to get a consensus. This argument is in itself, again, self-contradicting. If there cannot be a consensus on the caste system, how can we have established that there is a caste system in the first place? Farek et al. 2017. The shock is that there has not been an iota of development in this theory for the past 150 years, says Jalki and Pathan 2015. In fact, every single argument that wishes to debunk the mainstream conception and provide a novel explanation ends up creating a theory that bases itself on the concepts it just debunked. Jalki 2023 writes that Al-Baruni, an Iranian traveller who left notable accounts about India, was also a respected astronomer of that time. If he were to take up a time machine and arrive in present-day India, he would have tremendous difficulties understanding the astronomical developments which happened after him. However, he would have no difficulty understanding Wilkinson's book. The story never got old. It never gets old. If it cannot get old, can it be real? Who, what has sustained this caste system over the years? To impose such a great structure across the length and breadth of India, and to sustain it over thousands of years despite so many attempts to eradicate it, that institution must have some supreme power over India. How can such a system just appear some 3,500 years ago and spellbound each and every aspect of Indian life? Brahmanas are usually blamed for the case, but there is no historical evidence that suggests us that they had such an omnipotent power over the Indian society before caste came into being, if there was ever such a time. How can we assume that the caste system just appeared and got everyone under its spell? Farek et al. 2017. This problem is usually solved by claiming an Aryan invasion, AIT, but we still have no admissible evidence for this theory that confirms such a massive invasion. Aryan migration theory, AMT, is another such theory that solves that issue, but even if the migration is admitted, how can the Aryans impose an oppressive structure all over India without the use of force? We do not have answers to these questions. Kappens 2017. In fact, Malhotra and Neelakantan 2011 has shown how AIT and AMT have built their arguments on hollow grounds of race supremacy and European romanticism. I quote Balagangadhara et al. 2022. How can any reasonable person defend the suggestion that most, if not all, texts of a culture hide or express devious but successful conspiracies of a priestly class that has protected its alleged privileges over 3 millennia or more? How is it sociologically or politically possible for any class, anywhere in the world at any time, without centralized organization of any kind, to achieve this feat in a giant country like India and sustain it over 3,000 years? The above two questions indicate the crushing weight of the accumulated anomalies. Nothing in our entire world of knowledge prepares us for this miracle. Evidence returned for this argument is given from several Hindu texts, such as the Dharma Shastras. How good would it be for us to make the sense of present-day India through texts written thousands of years ago? Do we read the Bible to make sense of what Europe looks like today? We know that caste is not an Indian word, and some findings will tell that it is derived from the Portuguese word for Latin casta, that means social units. It was used to address India's social structures for the ease of the Europeans. This makes caste itself a conception of the outsiders. The Europeans translated Dharmashastras and did everything to understand India in order to control it. They could have not done it in the Indic sense. They have to have a framework to understand the Indian society. So can we now say that the terms caste, Varna, and Jāti mean something else in two different worldviews? With this, can we imply that the former has no existence outside the framework it was built into? If such is the case, what do we make of caste reservations? What do we make of the atrocities committed by the upper castes for years? What do we make of the anti-caste posture of the Bhakti movement and Buddhism? And most importantly, what do we make of the works of scholars such as Wilkerson and Yingde? To answer these questions, we will have to look into the answer of a very important question. What framework did the creators of caste have? The scholars of Balu's research program argue that the framework was a Christian framework. This leaves us with the most unexpected but the only reasonable theory with us. That is, to understand more about caste, we have to look not into Hindu but in the Christian theology. And you'll find more in part 2.